Cal Thomas wrote in the Chicago Tribune in September of 2016, note that that's the presidential debates between between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton had not yet occurred. So Thomas wrote, "Bad language in politics is nothing new. The 1800 presidential race between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who are now held in high regard as statesmen, was the beginning of what we now call negative campaigning. In addition to the often scurrilous things they said about each other, Adams and Jefferson had surrogates who attempted to outdo them. The president of Yale University, a John Adams supporter, suggested that if Thomas Jefferson were to become president, we would see our wives and daughters the victims of legal prostitution. A Connecticut newspaper warned that the election of Jefferson would create a nation where murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will openly be taught and practiced." Not to be outdone, James Callender, an influential journalist of the time, wrote that Adams was a rageful, lying, warmongering fellow, a repulsive pedant and gross hypocrite, who behaved neither like a man nor like a woman, but instead possessed a hideous hermaphroditical character. Thomas concluded, "Name-calling on both sides prevents us from hearing what solutions to America's manifold domestic and foreign challenges the candidates propose. Perhaps the upcoming debates will help focus their and our minds."
Joyce, that was a riot. Elle and I are just sitting here laughing and laughing. And a real reminder of, this is nothing new. And actually, they're not, the things that our candidates are saying are less offensive than what was said years ago.
But didn't our debate just add to that?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. That was a great reading. If you would like to do a reading, log into the HGP website as a member, and under the member tab, there is a sign-up sheet for readers. Type your name at an available date, and reading should be limited to about 3 minutes. Joyce's timing was just perfect. That was a lovely reading. Our speaker today has requested that questions are asked at the end of her presentation, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. It's a real honor today to have a speaker from the American Humanist Association. That's one benefit of these Zoom meetings, is that people from far away can come and join us without having to fly in an airplane. Emily Newman is the education coordinator at the American Humanist Association's Center for Education and Communications. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Creative Writing, as well as an MA in Professional Writing from Carnegie Mellon University. Emily grew up in ethical culture and has been active with the Future of Ethical Studies, National Ethical Service, and the Young Humanists International. Over the years, she has assisted with local nonprofits and small business with social media, website development, and marketing. Today, Emily will be presenting on the 10 Commitments of Humanism, which was a presentation in American Humanist Association's annual conference, and was an excellent. I'm so thrilled that she's here. So glad you were able to join us. Welcome, Emily. Just so glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Greetings from the East Coast. We've been doing Zoom for several years before the pandemic at the AHA, and have just kind of kept expanding our work, so that we're excited to not only do our own programming for folks and record it, but also be a part of your programming, and also, kind of spread some of the work that we're doing. So I'm gonna put up my slides. There you go. So yes, as Helen mentioned, we are sharing the 10 commitments of living humanist values, and these commitments were conceptualized by Paul Couture, who envisioned a way to articulate humanist values that inspire activism. And although people hear 10 commitments and think about the 10 commandments, this is certainly not any kind of dogma or doctrine. This is used as more of a moral compass, guideline, kind of jumping off point in order to understand and explain how we define humanism and how we actually apply it to our everyday life. One of the concerns that Paul was aware of is that we often are describing ourselves as what we lack, especially when we talk about atheism or non-theism. There's that negative prefix that talks about how we do not have a deity or belief in supernaturalism, but that doesn't help us explain who we are and help people really, understand the work and the values that we have. So the 10 Commitments represent our shared values and promote a democratic world in which every individual's worth and dignity are represent, nurtured, and supported, and where human freedom and ethical responsibility are natural aspirations for everyone. We also feel like these are not just limited to humanists. They are values and practices that anybody and hopefully everybody can relate to. And I'll go through each one of them to kind of show you that we have a short version to like a quick I will statement, and also a longer definition of each one to help, kind of understand what they're all about. But we also, know that there are different ways to practice each one. And we encourage people, once they understand the commitment, that they find their own ways to practice it and talk about it and incorporate it into life. So, and also I should say, these are listed in alphabetical order. They're not in order of priority or importance, and there is a lot of interconnectedness among them. We feel like, you kind of need them all together in order to form a fully humanist life. So we start with altruism. I will help others in need without hoping for rewards. Altruism is the selfless concern for the welfare of other living beings without expectation of reward, recognition, or return. The collective welfare of our communities and society depends on the welfare of each individual person. We should always seek to alleviate the suffering and hardships of others with compassionate action. By caring for others around us and lifting each other up, we reinforce healthy connections and contribute to the betterment of our community, society, and the world. Critical thinking. I will practice good judgment by asking questions and thinking for myself. And this critical thinking tends to include science and reason in there. So as we each are bombarded with a constant stream of information, it can become challenging to decide what is accurate and true. Thinking critically allows us to make sense of all this information and reason our way to good judgments and effective solutions to the problems we face, while rigorously avoiding pitfalls like rationalization, conformity, and stereotyping. This process forms the basis of scientific method, which opens the door for new discoveries through hypothesizing and experimenting. Critical thinking is a skill that requires continued attention, practice, and reflection. Exercising our minds to build these skills enables us to challenge biases in others and in ourselves, paving the way for a fair, open-minded, and autonomous perspective that fosters a multicultural worldview. Empathy. I personally feel like empathy is one of the hallmarks of humanism. So, not to choose my favorites, but I do feel like this is one I like to emphasize in all of my work. I will consider other people's thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Empathy means entering imaginatively into another situation in an attempt to understand their experience as though we are experiencing it ourselves. Empathy requires us to step outside of our own perspective to consider someone else's thoughts, feelings, or circumstance from that person's point of view. In many ways, empathy is the first step to ethical behavior, as it allows us to respond compassionately to the suffering of others and exercise good judgment when our actions may affect someone else. Understanding another's perspective is not only critical to building better relationships, but also makes us better citizens in our local and global communities. Empathy promotes tolerance, consideration, and compassion amongst us all. Environmentalism, and I want to kind of highlight, I'll mention it later again, but the AHA also has a Here for Climate initiative that is under the umbrella of the Center for Education. So we're trying to kind of step up our environmental awareness and action a bit more, and especially because it is connected to the concerns of too many politicians not paying attention to the science of climate change. So I will take care of the earth and the life on it. Regardless of our individual identities, we all share the same home, planet Earth. Just as we depend on the planet to sustain us with its precious resources, this planet's ecosystems depend on us to be good stewards and take responsibility for the impact human activity has on our shared planet. Disregard for the large-scale impacts humans have on our environment has caused extensive harm to Earth's ecosystems. Despite this, humanity is also capable of positive environmental change that values the interdependence of all life on this planet. Each of us must acknowledge our collective and individual mistakes, repair past damages, and purposefully work toward cultivating rich, diverse, and resilient ecosystems. Ethical development. I will always focus on becoming a better person. The key to understanding ethical development is acknowledging that nobody is perfect or has all the answers. Ethical development is a never-ending process that requires constant reflection and evaluation of our personal choices and the consequences they have on others. Fairness, cooperation, and sharing are among the first moral issues we encounter in our ethical development as human beings and are often embraced intuitively. But each new day carries with it new challenges and new moral dilemmas. We should continuously adapt and rebuild our moral frameworks with the goal of becoming ever better human beings. I just want to point out again, as I mentioned earlier, about the this is not the commitments are not like the commandments, that they are not kind of strict yes no demands on people. They are ideas that we need to kind of keep questioning and learning and developing. And I think ethical development is one of the key examples of that, because depending on situations and circumstances, decisions on how to react to an issue may change. So we want to make sure that we are people who are in the lifelong process of learning and developing and working to become better. Global awareness. I will be a good neighbor to the people who share the earth with me and help make the world a better place for everyone. We live in a world that is rich in cultural, social, and individual diversity, a world with rapidly increasing interdependence. As a result, events anywhere are more likely to have consequences everywhere. Global awareness broadens our knowledge of cultures and perspectives that are outside of our own experience. A true global awareness includes attention to both current and historical events. It acknowledges how we affect and how we are affected by the interconnected social, political, and economic systems in which we reside. The end goal of global awareness is global citizenship, which recognizes our personal responsibility to foster a healthy and dignified life for everyone in our global community. And I feel that resonates so much as we're dealing with this global pandemic, that while we may be alone in our homes, we are certainly not alone in dealing with the challenges that COVID-19 has brought. And we're not alone in finding solutions and positive lessons together. Humility. I will be aware of my strengths and weaknesses and appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of others. Humility means displaying modesty about accomplishments, talents, gifts, or importance of self. It acknowledges we humans are fallible and have limitations in what we know and can do. Being humble isn't about having the low self-esteem or denigrating oneself. Humility at its core is robust self-awareness, awareness of our strengths and weaknesses, our faults and our merits. Humility involves setting aside personal pride and overcoming our egos to embrace gratitude for what we have and appreciate others for who they are. In being humble, we recognize our own value in relation to others. Inherently, we are neither better nor worse than anyone else. Peace and social justice. I will help people solve problems and handle disagreements in ways that are fair for everyone. True peace involves an intense commitment to social justice and affirms the human rights and personal autonomy of all people. Any level of injustice against groups or individuals signifies existing conflict, even if the conflict isn't immediate or obvious. We attain peace only by consistently responding to injustice through thoughtful conflict resolution that aims to repair harms and ensure a fair and equitable society moving forward. This kind of conflict resolution is known as restorative justice. In order to achieve a just, peaceful society, we all must take claims of injustice seriously and ensure that those who are impacted most by rights violations determine the best course forward. Responsibility. I will be a good person even when no one is looking and own the consequences of my actions. Every day, each of us makes choices. These choices, large and small, all have consequences for ourselves and for the world around us. Moral responsibility involves taking conscious ownership of one's intentions and actions and being accountable for the resulting consequences. Although we all live in a society with various cultural values, expectation, and codes of conduct and social mores, ultimately, we all decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. Being a responsible person involves steadfast attention to what is right and willfully bearing the blame or praise for our own actions. Service and participation. I will help my community in ways that let me get to know the people I'm helping. Service and participation means putting values into action in ways that positively impact our communities and society as a whole. It fosters helping others, increasing social awareness, and enhancing accountability and many attributes of the other 9 commitments. Engaging in service doesn't just make the recipients better off, but those who serve can develop new skills, experiences, and personal satisfaction that all promote personal growth. We must all recognize that we are members of groups, and engaging service to benefit the group and the other individuals in it makes us all better off. You've probably heard the term, especially currently during the pandemic, about mutual aid. It's the practice of how it's not just about serving a community, but it's about working with that community and incorporating them in developing solutions for the problems that they face, because it's not about, a savior coming in to fix everything and then take over because they know best. That actually ends up disrespecting the community that you're trying to serve. So while all of these commitments are about action and working with people, we want to emphasize that it is about working with people and for people, and also to help continue developing yourself. So those are all the 10 commitments that we have, and we've been promoting them and making them more accessible to the general public by developing activities for children, lessons for classes, and content with our partners. You'll see on the right side where it says Friendship Emergency, that's an example of coloring pages that offer not only a creative outlet for art, but also an opportunity to review scenarios where the 10 commitments can be implemented to resolve an issue. This is the one complete one, but we do have several more in the works and are looking at not only providing them as separate PDFs, but also incorporating them into the workbook that I have the cover of the workbook on the left there. So this workbook provides exercises for children to work on individually or with adults to understand how their actions impact the world around them. The workbook was originally developed with a Scoutmaster who wanted to incorporate humanism into his Boy Scouts troop and had worked with us to potentially develop a humanist religious emblems program with the Boy Scouts of America. And although that didn't get completed, we did decide to move forward with our workbook and our badge and make them available to people. So we have that on humanistcommitments.org. And we're working on kind of expanding the workbook with the coloring pages and turning it into a bit of a full activities book that we can then sell with some stickers and badges. So that got a little halted due to the pandemic, but something to look forward to next year. And then interest in the workbook has, and making it more relevant for children who are not in the Scouts and not in the US, has led us to working on simplifying the language, making it easier for people in other countries to understand, as well as making it easier to later translate into other languages. So we've been working with some of the teachers at the Uganda Humanist Schools Trust on that, and have done some collaborations with Camp Quest and Camp Fire Girls to get the commitments out into local communities. So as I mentioned, we were translating, hopefully you can see the top of this, there you go. We were, the first step in getting the commitments out there to not only more countries, but even just more communities within the US, is wanting to make sure that we could translate them into other languages. So we had, this is the Swedish version shown there. That was a person who volunteered to do it and contacted us. But then I found some other translators and reached out to them and worked with people to check. So we now have on our website the 10 commitments in Swedish, German, Korean, French, Urdu, Bulgarian, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish, and Farsi. We are finalizing the Japanese version, although I think the older version is still up on the website, and I would love to get more. So if you yourself or you know somebody who is able to translate in another language, please feel free to let us know. You can email education@americanhumanist.org. And then we're right now only providing the posters in English, but if there is interest in other languages, we'd love to be able to keep expanding our work. I wanted to touch on some of the other stuff that comes out of the American Humanist Association Center for Education, because we don't only do the commitments, although the work of the commitments is sort of incorporated into all of our programs. So just to give you a little background, originally there was the Humanist Institute, developed in 1982, which was the educational powerhouse of the full spectrum of humanism. We worked with secular humanists and religious humanists because we wanted to make sure that we were educating future generations of humanist leaders. And we then in 2018 had the Humanist Institute merge with the American Humanist Association. You know, we were already working very closely together, but we made the official merge so that we basically created an education department within the AHA. So the work on training leaders, it's a graduate level program, that is the Humanist Studies program, and it's gone through a couple of iterations. We currently are in a partnership with Meadville Lombard Theological School and working on having relationships with other universities so that you can use our courses towards a master's degree, or you can use our courses towards a certificate. With the certificate, that's usually great for people like leading humanist groups or connected to nonprofits and implementing more humanistic practices. For the master's degree, that especially is useful for people interested in doing chaplaincies in university, hospital, prisons, or taking on more like executive director roles or becoming congregational leaders. Like in, when I say congregational leaders, examples would be like a Unitarian Universalist minister, an ethical culture leader, a humanistic rabbi, lots of opportunities that around. Then we also have I'll go down the right side. Speaking of Humanism is a monthly speaking program that used to be held in DC, and we've now expanded it to be online through Zoom and sometimes on Facebook Live. That's where we bring in a speaker to address topics connected to humanism. And currently we have, at least since March when we brought them online, we have the recordings of all of those programs on the education website. And then when we eventually do come back into the DC office, we're going to be considering making a bit of a hybrid mode, so we can have people in the office as well as still online. Critical Minds was developed during the pandemic as a way to kind of get more professors and authors to share their work and kind of be an intro to further reflection, which is a instructor-led online course. So with the further reflection, we're able to kind of take a smaller group of folks and dive deeper into a topic. We've done ones like on human brain evolution, looking at art and creativity with a humanistic lens. We have in November coming up the music therapy course, which will be a weekly course. We also have 2 different mindfulness meditation courses. And we're, looking to expanding the variety of topics that we can cover, because we want to make sure that people are aware of how broad and expanding humanism is. So going on to the left side, so we do have online studies available on the education website. There are about 10 free courses that are all great introductions to humanism, spirituality, science, psychology. And then we also have growing up to about 10 courses now that are paid. It's a one-time fee, and all the courses are self-guided. It's a mix of text, links, images, and quizzes. And we're going to try to get like a new course each year to keep expanding. So we're working right now on a course on humanism and pop culture that should come out in 2021. And we also have some courses there for our celebrants to lead humanist weddings, memorials. So we're probably in the future working on some coming of age work as well. The open lecture series is a one-day seminar that brings together activists and academics to really understand the full perspective on an issue. And then we record them and put them on our website. So we've done like the future of humanism. We've done social justice. Last year we did one on climate justice, and we'll be doing a new climate justice webinar series starting in 2021. And then we have the community resources. We'll be expanding that. That's especially important for our chapters and affiliates, where we can put information on humanist holidays, activities and programmings that would help our local groups, toolkits and guides for organizing groups. I'm going to be kind of cleaning up some of the older manuals and toolkits that are currently on the AHA site and consolidating them onto the education site, just so it's easier for folks to find. The masterclass currently has been a intimate meeting of like the organization leaders, so like executive directors and board members of the different humanist national organizations, to kind of tackle topics like anti-Blackness and racism and interconnectedness. But we are thinking about expanding that, especially now that we're using Zoom, and want to really bring in our chapter and affiliate leaders into the education and discussion process so that they can bring more information to members across the country. I mentioned earlier about the Here for Climate initiative. That is our focus on getting humanists active on climate action. And so we are currently editing the website. It's hereforclimate.org. And we're adding lots of toolkits, both for individuals and groups, as well as that's a great place for your group to either announce an event coming up about climate change or share a video of events that have happened before. I'm collecting some videos from other groups who have been doing programs. We also have on there some information about contacting your legislators about action. And we know that there's a lot of, along with individual responsibility, there's a lot of needs to get politicians and corporations involved in bigger change around climate action. And then the Humanist Society is an adjunct organization to the AHA that endorses our humanist celebrants, chaplains, lay leaders, and invocators. So the Center for Education helps train and review applications for all those positions. We also have a quarterly teleconference for our celebrants and chaplains to continue learning with each other. And we have a quarterly webinar series for all of our local groups. And in November, we're going to be bringing those two groups together for a program that talks about the importance and the benefits of groups working with celebrants and chaplains to be able to provide services and ceremonies and celebrations to the wider community, as well as the humanist group, and how you can kind of together advocate for and publicize humanism in your region. And then I will end this with just a general reminder, if you're not already a member of the American Humanist Association, we welcome you to come to the website, americanhumanist.org, check out all of our publications and donate to support our programs. You can, if you are a new member, you will get the Royce Beckhart book, Creating Change Through Humanism. You'll have the magazine, it's 6 issues each year, and also access to the online articles at thehumanist.com. You'll get the quarterly newsletter Free Mind, which I think may be currently being incorporated into the magazine at the moment, but probably will be separated soon. You also will get discounts to conferences and other special events. You'll have access to all of our chapters and affiliates. While we currently are stuck in our areas due to the pandemic, we always encourage, when you are able to travel safely, it's always fun to get to check out other humanist groups. You may be also currently with groups online, checking out the other programs that groups have, but it's kind of nice to be able to find out what's going on with humanists in other parts of the country. And then in general, we appreciate everyone's support with our work on humanist education, legislative and legal advocacy, and visibility for humanists, atheists, agnostics, nuns, and non-religious people. So that is all I wanted to share, although I'm happy to answer questions. But that is, kind of the 10 Commitments of Humanist Living, the American Humanist Association in general, and the AHA's Center for Education work.
Emily, thank you so much. That was lovely. And I know we're going to have a lively conversation. You can't hear our applause, but we are.
I see some of the hands going. Thank you.
We are, boy, did that give me a lot to think about as you wrote, those were pretty deep. They were very deep thought. I mean, there's a lot to unpackage there. And I have a question. We'll start out. I remember when we were raising our daughter and I was searching for, I grew up in the Catholic tradition, so I was kind of searching for a church, even though I was definitely a lapsed Catholic and had really become a agnostic. But I was searching for a community for our daughter, kind of a ethical community. Mm-hmm. And through a lot of bungling ways, we found our way to the Humanists of Greater Portland. But how would you bring a young family, a busy young family, they're juggling so much, but this is such a wealth of information for a young family to say that, yeah, this is how I want to raise our kids. This is the kind of family our values, they're just all there. How do you get a family to come into the humanist tradition that's so foreign, really, compared to established churches?
Yeah, well, so, I feel very lucky that I was brought up in the humanist community. Similar to a lot of folks, like my mother was raised Catholic and my father was raised Jewish, and had, even though they weren't very religious, they still had a lot of benefits to having those communities and those connections to their family. So it was great that they were able to find ethical culture as sort of a way to not compromise on their values, but really get to the heart of what it is that they wanted to teach their children. And then also have sort of an extended family, since we didn't have all of our relatives nearby. But I think that, to a certain degree, the humanism kind of sells itself in that every parent wants what's best for their children and wants them to learn to be responsible, caring individuals who find a place in the world. And so that's one of the reasons that I think the 10 Commitments does a really nice job of really like framing what a responsible active adult looks like. And you can, kind of break that down into age appropriate lessons. Like children will always understand unfairness, and they can feel it when like they are not receiving the same benefits as a sibling or a friend, and they're comparing themselves to other people. But you need to kind of talk with them about like, okay, so how does that make you feel, and how can you connect with someone else having those feelings, and how can we maybe make it so that everybody feels like they're treated fairly. And you can kind of take that personal experience and then expand it to issues going on in the area, issues going on in the country. Kind of you can expand that to talk about what makes people similar and different. And I think that I can pull up the workbook that I mentioned. Like one of the things that has is really kind of getting children to be aware of their surroundings and their relationships and exploring their ideas and questions. And I think that's what's so important about humanism and makes it different than a traditional religious upbringing, is that we want you to ask questions. We want you to understand. We want you to not just take everything we say, directly and then regurgitate it back to us. And I don't mean to, I don't think that all religions do that. But I think that there's kind of like a bringing children into the learning process that that humanism, really incorporates. I'll say, like, for example, the as I mentioned with the workbook. Let's see. I admit that I'm not, like necessarily trained as a teacher. So when I was working on it, I was always worried about what parts of it were like too simple or too complex for folks. But one of the examples in here about activities that children can do is thinking about how they can be an assistant to their family each day. This is a form of showing altruism, thinking about what challenges, responsibilities face the people around them that they can do something about. Maybe that means washing the dishes, putting away their clothes, cheering someone up, carrying the groceries. So it's, kind of like all these just everyday tasks are not seen as, adult things or chores that they don't want to do. They see how helping somebody and taking the load off somebody ends up, really showing that you care and showing that you support them. We also have, some exercises in here about differentiating fact and opinion, and kind of build off of the critical thinking concept, and helping and, not only taking statements that they understand, but also like encouraging them to then go into newspapers or watch news and figure out what's a fact versus an opinion, and how can I use this to understand information and process it. The last one I'll say, because I know there are probably other questions. There's also, to go on a nature walk and kind of be aware of the different animals and plants around, and think about what issues you see. Like, are there not enough vegetables in your area? Are there trash or broken glass places and kind of get into what is my role, what power do I have to make a difference, and who can I work with to to fix what needs fixing in our area.
I think, Emily, we are just at such a point where families are spending so much time with their children right now that I think this workbook and getting it out there is going to be a real service to families. Thanks for your good work. I have a comment, I believe, from Dorman Blazer. In 2016, I made presumption that people would have the same access to information that I had. I was wrong. Also, I did not know that much of the basis for climate change. I had it figured out, that basis. Need for good presentation for that basis, on climate change. And then Willie has a question. Do the Boy Scouts now welcome atheists?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So it very much depends on your region. So I can tell you that here in DC, I actually directly know a group of, now it's co-ed, it used to be a boy group and a girl group, but a group of scouts that are connected to the Washington Ethical Society, which is a humanistic congregation here. And they not only are probably mostly non-theistic or humanist children, but there's also a mix of gender non-conforming children and some LGBTQ children. So, I feel a little biased in knowing that the groups are there, and I know, and I've heard in our work to try to develop this medal or badge, we did learn about other groups that would be interested in the humanist workbook and award, because they don't necessarily, even though there is a document that each scout is supposed to sign saying that they have a duty to God, depending on their scout master, they don't always sign it. They don't always talk about it. They sometimes sign it knowing that they don't believe in it. I guess it kind of depends on who's in charge of that region, who maybe pushes it or like brings religion into the region's programs. Unfortunately, the national organization is put us through a lot of bureaucracy to even find a person we can ask the questions to. And then we kind of decided to give up on that relationship just due to other concerns, and realizing that, we can kind of not waste our time with the organization and directly get information to the individuals. There is a group called Scouts for Equality that they were big pushers in getting LGBTQ scouts recognized and respected, and they have also been making efforts to get atheists and non-theists respected. They do have the Scouts do have a relationship with Unitarian Universalists, so there was some conversation about maybe we can just kind of build on that relationship and have a more humanist focused part. But I think that there's a lot of uncertainties with how the Scouts are going to be moving forward, as their relationship with the Mormon Church has changed, as their financials have changed, as some lawsuits have come up. So I guess the summary, the short answer is they have not fully accepted atheists in the way that they should. They have become a bit better than they used to be. And I think that there have been other groups like Campfire Girls and Camp Quest or Campfire Kids, I think it's Camp Quest and Ethical Navigators. So there is sort of, people are filling the need for those kind of groups and activities when they have hit a wall with the Scouts.
Did you say that the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts are now the same thing?
No, sorry. So the Boy Scouts of America have changed to be Scouts of America, or BSA. The Girl Scouts are still separate, and I've heard some mixed views on how the Girl Scouts feel about Boy Scouts accepting girls now, because kind of a concern about they're not like, how much are they changing to actually welcome girls in, and are they going to be, you know, kind of, the Girl Scouts actually, by the way, are much more humanistic. They have
you don't
civil
have to
rights.
sign. They don't have to
Right.
sign anything.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've got a comment from Dave DiNucci. Can you provide a little more information on how long the development of these commitments have been going on, and how broad the input has been, and how flexible they are to future changes? Is there a schedule for revisiting and potentially revising, or are they assumed to be pretty final at this point?
Sure. So I am, before the Humanist Institute merged with the AHA to form the Center for Education, there had been a previous education center developed with Pritpal Couture and Bob Behrman. And this, I believe it was early 2000s or early 2010s. But then as, it may have been early 2010s actually, and they had actually been also working with a lot of teachers because they were trying to get the 10 Commitments into public schools. That's one of the reasons that we didn't want to make it specific to just humanists. We wanted to be more about ethical living and moral development. That education center didn't have the full funding and staff support in order to sustain it, and we have, since they had developed the 10 Commitments, but some of the wording needed to be updated when we reevaluated it in 2019. Now I know that Bob and Pritpal were the main writers. I don't know how many other people or if they had a council that they consulted with in terms of like narrowing it down to 10 or consolidating or defining. I know that the Center for Education at the time, and when we did this revision in 2019, we had 3 staff members who collaborated with our social justice team, as well as Pritpal and Roy Speckhart. In terms of future plans, we don't have anything specific. I think we are open to people contacting us and maybe having some discussions. We don't have, a particular plan of like, we will revisit this every X number of years, but we've kind of been focused in the last year at more of how we can get the commitments out there and accessible for folks. And I think that while we feel pretty proud of the definitions we came up with, the practice of the commitments is something that we are very open to hearing with what people would like to do and supporting their work. Like Camp Quest, for example, was talking about doing these video lessons, since they're all on Zoom and not running their camps in person. And so we were kind of like, yes, tell us what we can do to support you. Don't let us hold it up just because we're a little busy with other things. So I guess if you have some specific edits to the commitments themselves, just contact us at education@americanhumanist.org, and I can put that into the chat as well.
That would be lovely, Emily. Put that into the chat. That's a good idea. Let's see. Joyce writes, after I heard the presentation on the 10 Commitments at the AHA conference, I surveyed the presentations we have at HTP for the last 10 years. I found some interesting results. First of all, Joyce, would you be willing to come on and talk a little bit about that? That would be lovely.
Yeah, looking back at our last 10 years in light of your 10 commitments, it was fascinating to figure out where our priorities actually lie. And every few years we survey the membership to see what kinds of presentations people want. And science always comes out very, very high. as I look back over the 10 years, the highest numbers of presentations that we've had that actually fit on with your wheel of 10 commitments have been 44 presentations on the natural environment, 44 on global awareness, and then 36 on peace and social justice. But we've also had presentations on critical thinking, ethical development. It's harder to find exactly where we have addressed responsibility and empathy directly or altruism directly. Those seem to overlap with some of the other categories. But I think my question is, because we have, in this particular chapter anyway, and I don't know about other chapters, we have such a strong interest in science. And the only way I see science represented in the commitments is in the natural environment. Now that it would overlap, I understand, with others too. But we see science, I believe, as a way of seeking truth. And I'm feeling that is one place in which the commitments are a little short. And you mentioned it might be open to what's the word I want? Not revision, but tweaking. So anyway, I would be interested in your response to that.
Yeah, so I think that the scientific process is very much represented in critical thinking. And then, you can, I feel like there's arguments to be made for connection to science to all of these in terms of, we need to, our scientific developments affect our global awareness and support our connections, as you mentioned, with environmentalism. There's also a sense of the scientists themselves and the science writers have to take the responsibility in how they share findings and explain them with people and also that how the general public really understands and applies the science to the world. I think that certainly science and reason are like the most emphasized aspects of humanism generally, especially in terms of compared to religions, we take science as our groundwork as opposed to a sacred text. But I think it's that one of the things that the wheel emphasizes that we'd like to emphasize more as an organization is the idea of working on the relationships and connections with people so that we can emphasize compassion and empathy. So, I understand that, it's exciting to learn about scientific developments and to make sure that we are incorporating them into our policy development. I think it's also just as important to make sure that we have empathy and humility in our policy development, because policies are there to support people and communities and make living better for everybody. And so it's, maybe it's less about having those commitments as a lecture program for groups, but there are other ways to kind of explore them in the development and practice of our groups. For one example, you probably have seen that the Trump administration is banning racial equity trainings. And and some nonprofits are stepping up their equity trainings because not only are the resources more available and promoted, but sort of as a, what can we do to, even if we can't right away, change the minds of the Trump administration. And so those trainings, they include science, they include research and, a lot of psychology and social sciences, but the real practice of the training and the result that comes from it is a bit more on the practical side. How are we facing our biases? How are we showing our support or raising our voices or listening more to other people. And I think that those kind of trainings includes learning from our history and planning for our future, which is something that I'd love to be able to help our groups do more of, because I mean, I know that it's, especially now with Zoom, it's easy to have a speaker give a lecture and then we just kind of do a Q&A. But in order for us to all feel really empowered as humanists and try to like incorporate humanism into our lives, there's opportunities for more projects and discussion and, you know, kind of learning from each other, and determining the actions we want to put out there into the world. And I know that especially on Zoom, discussion management can be challenging. You know, there's always that, you know, who's in charge of calling on people and how do we make sure we don't speak over each other or we're not here for hours and hours. So unfortunately, I don't have like a perfect guide to hand off to our groups in order to facilitate that. But I think that, you know, kind of the more that we can develop good practices within our humanist groups, the more people will then take that knowledge to maybe try to heal some conflicts within their family or in their friends, and especially around politics and around, you know, our relationship with our coworkers and our colleagues in the world. It's kind of that idea of, you know, always learning and expanding our knowledge and practicing compassion.
You're using the idea of science, Emily, just for in all the 10 commitments to include science through the whole thing. So thank you. Let's see, Dorman has a question. Is there a way that he can find a group in the Portland area for his 14-year-old son and daughter that would be like the Boy Scouts or the Girl, you know, that would be a non-theist group? How does he find out about groups like this?
So I can't talk specifically about your region, but you know, I think most, if you are looking at Camp Quest or Scouts, usually they will on their website include their local areas. You know, we at the AHA, we certainly encourage and would love for our groups to be able to add on a children's program if they don't already have one, but we understand that that takes a lot of steps and a lot of dedication, and especially now it would mean more Zoom learning for students, which I hear is very difficult for folks. I was helping out with some of the American Ethical Union children's programming, and they were touching on the 10 commitments a bit, but we ended up putting that on hiatus because children were just feeling like they wanted to disconnect from their screens. And that's one of the reasons I like the workbook too. It allows for activities away from a device. Most of it doesn't include the internet, and also an opportunity for you know, a child to work on their own if they're of a certain age where they can do that independently, but also could work with an adult, you know, and kind of develop more of a mentor relationship and have a chance to, you know, kind of discuss or ask the questions that they have. I guess it would be great if your members knew of any local groups, or maybe wanted to even just like put the question out there and see, you know, maybe there are some groups or some parents interested in forming groups. Mm-hmm. One of our Florida chapters developed a like science club for the students because a couple of the parents were like, you know what, I want my kid to have a chance to do experiments that they don't do in class and talk to their friends. And they ended up having, some of the parents were professors or scientists, and you said, okay, well, I'll do this lesson if you guys can do next week's lesson, and then you bring the snacks. And, you know, they kind of ended up creating a schedule and coordinating a group just due to the interest gathered by people.
That, you know, and we tried our group tried a youth program probably about a decade ago, and it just it takes time to build something like that, and it just didn't go as we had planned, so we closed. And but what it sounds like what you're saying is try to find, like, sponsor somebody in the community, or use our group just as our website as a way to disseminate information about groups that we kind of put our stamp of approval on, or something like that. That's a good idea. Thank you so much. Dell has a comment regarding the Scouts. Could they pledge to society versus pledging to God?
I think so. I don't know exactly, how to reach the higher ups to get that change to happen. I think that their group is probably one that will listen to their members more loudly than the general public. So if you do know of any Scouts or Scout groups, I'd say, share the information about humanism, and your thoughts about how they could be more inclusive. You can always make a pitch about, wouldn't you like to be able to reach more young folks in the area? But unfortunately, we're not going to, be able to push that on a national level.
Okay, thank you. Al has a question. Go ahead, Al.
Oh yeah, I'll start by making a comment along the analogy to the Ten Commandments. I think there's a great similarity here in that when Moses wanted to give the law to the people, he didn't appoint a committee. He went up on the mountain and came down with some tablets, and that was that.
Yeah,
these commitments, I guess, to us as members, kind of are like the same thing. We didn't know about them until about a month ago, and now all of a sudden we've got them. And there's not been any as far as we can tell, any participative way to help develop these or whatever. And I think that's a good idea because of the question that, people say yes, but to almost anything like this, and they want to get their little butt in there to be recognized in the doctrines of the whole. And so I think you've done a good job there. Actually, you've got a good start. But I wonder if you have any way of any recognition of the amount of damage control you might have to do with all the people who say yes, but about these 10 commitments, about, well, you left out this, or I don't think that belongs in there, and you could get into all kinds of trouble with that. And how do you keep this from being bogged down and all that kind of stuff? And the other question I have about it is that I got the idea from your talk that these commitments are more about humanism being a direction instead of a dogma. Mm-hmm. And that you're talking about the things that humanists believe are good, but there seems to be no touchstone for determining good, which I guess is reasonable because the universe doesn't have to have a touchstone. There's no reason to think that there would be one to determine what's good and what's bad. But it's a hard sell to make in that situation. You've got to really give people a different picture of how the whole world works to get them to go along with this idea about, well, we decide what's good and bad, and these are the things we like, and that's why we like them.
That's your question, honey.
So how do you handle this about deciding what to put in and what to leave out, and how to get this moving?
Yeah. So even though we are, of course, branding this with our logo and saying that this is the commitments that we encourage people to take on, we certainly are not forcing them on people. In another presentation that we did with the Secular Student Alliance, people brought up, well, what about the UU principles, or what about the tenets of Satan, humanistic, the temple of the Satanic temple? So it's, they're not Satanists, but they're kind of like, they're using the edginess of Satanism with the separation of church and state to kind of form a humanist community. And they have tenets that are like, very much related to our stuff. I think our 10 commitments are as I said, the great frameworks, jumping off points, kind of breaking down what it takes to be dedicated, compassionate, responsible people. I think that there is, some of the edit suggestions we've seen are not bad, but are, kind of just another way to phrase some of the stuff we incorporate. Some people have said, why does it have to be 10? That's too close to the commandments. Knock this one off, make it 9, add this one, make it 11. And as you said, you can definitely talk for hours and hours, because there is, unlike, a mathematical equation, it's hard to know when you've got it right and you're done. And as an editor myself, I, always have that hard time of knowing when to move on to the next paragraph, because I finally feel like that other paragraph is fine. And then I end up coming back to it before I submit it, and then still questioning it after it's published. But, we don't want to delay action by constantly revising and questioning. I think that in general, we feel confident that this is a great variety of the topics and the ideas that come up in our humanist manifestos and in our education and in, all of the statements that we prepare. When, I emphasized at the beginning that we tend to go in alphabetical order and not by ranking them. The wheel is not in order in any form. And actually we like the wheel in terms of showing that it's not a hierarchy. So, some people are gonna say certain things are most important. I've been in meetings with humanist organizations where people are saying, we should only be doing advocacy because we need to have humanists heard in politics. And other people saying like, well, but we're not an advocacy, we can't do lobbying, we're not a political group. We need to make sure that our communities are being supported and growing. And then other folks going like, well, we're really more about teachers. And I feel like, well, individuals and particular organizations can have their focuses, what makes them different and what their strengths are. In general, the humanist movement needs to work on education, action, community, and I think that these commitments help touch on what's going to make all of those parts strong. I do think that when people have expressed frustration with them, because I understand this idea, as you mentioned, about like, they're just out there now. It wasn't like we did a whole vote amongst members or amongst our groups. They were, I can't speak to how they were developed initially and who chimed in and wasn't heard with the first write. I wasn't there for that, and don't have a whole write-up of the notes from those discussions. But I do know that when we were working on rewriting them, we were very careful about our language, taking in some of the criticisms we've gotten for humanism over the years. Like, it's too human-centric. Why don't you care enough about animals? And why aren't you doing more about the environment? Or it's too science-focused. Why aren't you talking about our social justice work and how we can bring in different folks? Or like, there is concerns about like, without directly mentioning race, gender, sexuality, are we ignoring all of the identities that people, bring when they want to be seen as a whole self coming into our communities? And so, I think that there's, some of the wording in here is purposely open and broad and vague so that we can kind of use that to encompass more ideas, and especially when it comes to like making this clear for different ages, and kind of on Helen's question before about bringing this to parents to support their child rearing, there's, you can take any of these commitments and apply it to a personal situation that, a toddler can understand. And you can also apply it to some of the issues coming up on our ballots currently that, we're all facing and maybe being highlighted due to all the issues coming up in 2020. So I think that we really want to just have people figure out how they would like to connect with and expand on the commitments.
Thank
And
you.
also, I'm sorry, just one other thing, like as you and Joyce was mentioning about like the breakdown of how your programs, you know, again, while we like all the commitments, but we certainly don't expect for every group to agree with all of the commitments and treat them equally within your programming. We would hope though, and feel pretty confident that nobody straight out rejects any of the commitments and is like, you know, that is totally not humanism. So even if you say like I said before, empathy is one of my top 5, you know, like my emphasis. I know other people who would choose another one, and, you know, especially due to the colors and graphics, they may have preferences. But we do hope that you at least get to know and, you know, connect to all of them.
Thank you, Emily. That was good. There's a comment from Sue Pearson that Campfire, which I believe is now co-ed, exists in Portland as far as a group that is a non-theist group. And from Jim and Jessica, the touchstone can be what the consequences and impact will be, and whether that is what we want. So, you know, the touchstone of living a good life, or good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, I'll read this, but, or you could come on. What do you want to do?
I can come on, I guess.
Okay.
I basically, I've just known some humanists who kind of drifted away from humanism. They thought one of the things that attracted them to humanism, I guess, originally they say, was this idea of personal freedom that humanism offers. And I don't see that represented in the commitments. And I personally think the commitments are more focused on the way that I think of humanism. And also they, and we, as we know, much of society sees social justice as something that's gone too far. You know, I mean, they talk about social justice warriors, and those people are just, you know, spending all their time on worrying about stuff that doesn't have to be worried about, et cetera. And their argument in terms of humanism might be that if you just use critical thinking and you just look at, you know, the statistics and whatever, and just judge everything on that, and stop paying so much attention to racial whatever, and trying to bring certain racial groups up to in fairness or equity or any of those words. Let's just, you know, call it like we see it, and move forward on that basis. And they might call that more critical thinking or whatever. I personally think they're just taking the short view, and that they're not carrying the critical thinking all the way through to the end point. They're just kind of stopping halfway. But have you heard that idea that personal freedom should be represented a lot in humanism, or that social justice, that is kind of, some people do rebel against that? I think I heard you just say, or somebody just said, you know, they don't see anybody rebelling against that. But I mean, I know we hear the term social justice warrior, for example. That's often considered to be a negative, pejorative term. How do you put all that into context?
Well, first, can you, I guess, just make sure I'm understanding you, can you define personal freedom?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can. I mean, they and I'm trying to relate ideas from other people that I can't necessarily completely agree with, so I'm probably doing a bad job. But they kind of have come to see humanism as too restrictive, as, you know, well, we're supposed to stop from you know, exhibiting our power or our flexibility or whatever, because we have to stand back and be, well, right now I think the term is white, you know, not white superiority, but where white people are supposed to be more concerned about, you know, make sure we're not overbearing and pushing other people, you know, into minor roles when we shouldn't be, or whatever. And I mean, they think that they should just be able to come out and, you know, let's just not worry about all that. I don't know. I can't say for sure. I'm not necessarily representing them well, but I do know that they love the term personal freedom, and they thought that that's something that humanism represented. I do know that.
So I know that there is always conflict with the concept of the nuns, the, like, you know, not unaffiliated and non-religious people, when they answered the survey, that like you can't really group them together because they really end up being a mix of atheists, humanists, spiritual but not religious, you know, whatever. And I think that that is one of the challenges that we have as humanists, you know, not even the label that we choose for ourselves and our organizations is a big deal. And there's a lot of, you know, connection and similarities, and then people make their own distinctions, which may or may not be agreed upon. So when I heard, you know, when I saw you mention personal freedom, my initial thought is, you know, yes, humanists are not restricted by religious dogma. So to a certain degree, you know, you're automatically free as long as there is no deity controlling you or afterlife you're scared of. But once you kind of remove that pressure, how do you make your decisions? How do you guide your life? And that's one of the reasons that we, you know, developed the commitments. We wanted to put it into the active and positive form, you know, and maybe you do some of these things subconsciously, but ultimately, if you care about anyone other than yourself, you're going to be, you know, kind of thinking about how your actions impact people, how other people impact you, how you communicate and decide on your actions. So I would, I understand that I would disagree with people who are like, you know, total, I want to do whatever I want. You can't tell me what to do. Freedom of speech means that I can say whatever nasty thing comes out of my mind like in person or on social media. I would say that a humanist would have a pause and restraint and think about, you know, yes, I have the freedom to say whatever I want, but why am I thinking these things? What can I say that will actually help somebody and put good out there? We do have people who I think are more atheists, but use the word humanist and think that we need to that humanists should only be atheist, or just assume that we are automatically all atheist. But I think that with humanism, it's not just atheism; it's also, you know, having that ethical development, having that action plan. And I don't mean this to say like atheists don't have morals or don't have actions. It's just that the word atheism is specific to the lack of belief in a God, or agnostics or unsure about a God. And you know, the atheist organizations have developed a bit more particular work, like, you know, they're going to stand up on issues because they believe in separation of church and state. But humanism wants to make sure that everyone connected to that word understands the work that needs to go into actually making the most out of our lives on earth while we have it with other people and other beings. To your point about the social justice warrior, I mean, I think that unfortunately is a negative label that has been put and often is misused. Like, I don't think that anybody who works on social justice should be referred to as a social justice warrior in a negative, you know, put down way, because that not only is that just pointless name calling, but like is dismissing the work that is needed and is in practice. I think that sometimes social justice warrior is used for those people who are kind of more trying to take credit for social justice work and are not actually doing the work. People that are, kind of like, I'm posting a meme, so that means check, I'm not a racist, and we're all good, but then still spewing, unethical things or treating people poorly. So while I don't think that we should be, I'm kind of like neither for nor against the term social justice warrior, but I also feel like I'm against the practice of labeling people that and using that as like a reason to move away from actually talking about society's issues and talking about the solutions for them. I think, if people are interested in understanding racism and anti-racism, there are a lot of important books out there. There's a lot of group discussion series. There's a lot of, we're actually going to be developing a program with for the AHA coming out soon to allow people to both understand and the concept and work on it. But one of the top books, because it's a really easy read, is Anthony Pinn's When Colorblindness Isn't the Answer. And that's also a good book if you want to do a group book discussion. He explains how in certain communities and in certain times, it was not only preferred, but recommended to not talk about race and just be like, we're all one race, we're all great. But that ends up really ignoring a good chunk of a person's identity and dismissing them and showing that you don't care. And so, not that we have to constantly talk about race to the point of exhaustion, but we shouldn't ignore it. And I just recently watched the Sesame Street CNN town hall about standing up to racism and really appreciated it. Although I'm not currently a child or a parent, I felt like they did a great job of incorporating children's questions and messages, as well as addressing what discussions would be helpful for families and teachers to have, not only about racism, but about, police brutality, about the protests going on, about how we can kind of, all take action together to make a more harmonious, respectful society. So, and even in that town hall, they mentioned other books and websites to go to. So even if, social justice is maybe not something all of your members feel comfortable discussing, or it's not as top on the list as science, I would recommend you not ignore it or dismiss it or feel uncomfortable addressing it.